In this video, I'm gonna show you how I made this very simple but effective hit for my NULLSPACE sample pack. And I'm gonna go over the general approach that I usually have when I create these hits. So this is what it sounds like. And as you can see in this case, it's just 3 layers actually, but keep in mind that each of these layers might consist of multiple other layers and sounds that have been layered before. And this is what it sounds like without the group processing. And these are the individual layers without the group processing. So this is more of a kick punch layer than the next one. So this is going to be more of the body mid-range layer. And then the last one is a low-end boom layer. None of the individual tracks have any processing on them at all, but that's mainly because all of the assets that I'm using have been carefully prepared with this specific use case in mind. So they're already mixed, of course, and they typically work for this kind of sound without having to do a lot of additional processing. But of course, this depends on how many layers you're using and what kind of stuff you're actually layering. But very often it just works right away. And if you have watched some of my other videos, then you probably know that I prepare a lot of assets for specific purposes, and then when I'm actually designing the sounds, I only have to drag and drop these assets in, play around with them, quickly exchange them for others, and I don't really have to worry about creating new individual elements all the time when I'm actually designing sounds. For hits, for trailer hits specifically, for example, I have categories like body, which is more noisy, mid-range stuff. Or I also have punch layers like this. Or sub-layers like this. And so I either just drag and drop them directly in here. And very often I also end up using Soundweaver by Boom Library, which is a really helpful plugin for this kind of stuff. And the way I prepare my assets and group them together just works very well with this approach too. So the way this works is I can just choose my folder with all the body layers that I want to use. I can say I want to have 2 layers, and then I can just click randomize. And it's just going to pull in 2 of these body sounds that I've prepared. And I can quickly switch them with this randomize button down here. And then I can just add more stuff, a punch layer, but I just want 1 sample at once each time. Then I might also use some kind of sub layer, as I said before. Also want only 1. Maybe I want some kind of metallic hit in there, and maybe I want some organic hit in there as a layer as well, and also just 1 in this case. And then I can just randomize until I find something that I like. When I end up liking something, I just prepare it for drag and drop. And this is essentially going to bounce the groups in this case with the setting to wave files that I can just drag and drop into Ableton in this case. And that's where these groups come from, essentially. In this case, I've used Soundweaver for this. And that's why, for example, in this layer, there might be a variety of different samples in there that maybe when I was preparing them as assets, I've already layered with something else. This is one of the workflows that I really like for this kind of stuff. But so yeah, in this case, the only processing that I have on these is on the group, again, with and without the processing here. And we can actually just go through them one by one. So the first thing I have here is an equalizer, just cutting the lower mids mainly and boosting the lows and highs slightly. But this is primarily about cutting some of the mud that's just gonna build up in this area very often. So with and without. Then after this, I have a combination of 2 plugins, so I very often use them after each other. They're also very similar actually, as you can see in the UI already. So I very often like to use the sub and low function here. So I usually tune them to the same frequency and then just use the sub and the low function in both of these. And with the parallel particles, I usually use the thick function here if I use something other than the sub. And with the infected mushroom one, I usually end up using magic and body. So we can listen to this with and without those 2 plugins as well. Then after this, I have still one of my favorite transient shapers, in this case a multiband transient shaper. And I think this is pretty much the preset, the more punch preset that you can find in here. I don't think I've had to make too many changes to this one. This is actually my favorite preset in this one that I end up using very often. And I usually just have to do slight adjustments to this to make it work. So we can also listen to this with and without the shaper. Just gives it a bit more presence, more punch, makes it sound a bit tighter. One of the main things for this kind of sound is the reverb, of course. In this case, I wasn't going for this typical noise high-end tail that you will very often find in trailer heads. Instead, I wanted to have a low-end focused reverb tail. So as you can see here, I boosted the decay rate in the lows and cut it in the highs. Pretty much did the same with the EQ here. So I think this kind of fits very naturally with the tail that these sounds had. Afterwards, another EQ, just cutting mainly around 400 Hertz. Again, just cleaning the sound up a bit after all this processing. And then after this, again, one of the combinations that I very often use when I'm doing group processing is Gullfoss and Soothe. So Soothe in this case, especially also to tame some of the resonances in the low end. And as I've already mentioned in my last video, Gullfoss are typically used to tame sounds and to boost some of the low end with this boost here. You can also see that it's not really doing that much. And then afterwards, to make things loud, I actually have these two after each other. So first God Particle and afterwards Pro L just to boost it a bit more. And this is the sound before it goes through another round of light processing and mastering. But this is pretty much 95% the final sound. I hope this was interesting, and let me know if you would like to know more about how to make assets for this kind of sound. Take care.